That seems pretty loud. So... how about we do something where it doesn't go into the red constantly? Hey, what's up? I'll have to remember to look down every so often to actually see chat. Ugh. I'm so rusty. Yeah, but slowly waiting for basically 2 o'clock before I really discuss anything. I guess, if you're still here anyway, how's your side project going? Oh. Oh, cool. Sounds like it's coming along then. Uh... You know what? I'm no good at this stage. I guess hello to anyone watching. I don't actually have my numbers out, so don't know if anyone's actually here. Oh. Yeah, I mean, I feel like marketing is one of those pillars for like making a successful game that doesn't get talked about a lot. Everyone usually talks about like art, code, and design, and marketing's, you know, pretty substantial. Yeah. And that's probably like the hardest thing nowadays anyway, is getting people's attention. Uh, Seeing all this stuff in like through HDMI is kind of funny sometimes. The little imperfections that get by in an analog signal that kind of just don't here. Yeah. I guess one thing for me is I quit my job in December, or like at the end of December. So it's been kind of nice. I've had some time to work on stuff, and not just F-Zero things, but like all of the projects that I kind of have on the back burner. I'm just trying to get through as many as possible before I get a job again. Yeah, that's the eternal struggle of like wanting to work on your own things and then, you know, needing to pay for stuff. But yeah, I mean, so far so good though. I've been enjoying my time off. I've actually been able to like get through stuff, which is pretty good because I feel like I haven't been able to get through as much stuff as I normally like to. And just in the last 2 weeks, the amount of stuff I just like hammered out, it's pretty good. For example, like a month ago, I bought a bunch of wood to make some shelving, and it basically just sat in the middle of our living room because it was the only spot that would fit like these 12-foot beams. When I finally got through that, it's just about done. And then there's obviously some F-Zero stuff. I forget what else I did. But oh yeah, like wrote an article. I forget. A bunch of other stuff. Oh boy. Nice. Yeah. I had friends years ago at this point when I was doing my degree that were really getting into Substance Painter. And it seems really good. Like, it just does a ton of stuff. I've also been meaning to get into Blender more seriously. Crap. Just to be able to, like, block stuff out and test things. But also, Chemicals, his tool set for, like, SOGX stuff is all in Blender, so... would probably be good if I I'm not saying like knew a bit more, but being more familiar would be useful. Because at some point, right, like getting models in and out would be ideal. In a lot of ways, for like the tools that I'm making, I kind of don't care about models. Or specifically like the authoring of models, because I know other people are more interested in that anyway. The only thing I care for is really like being able to place those models, as well as generate a track model. Like outside of generating some track model, even if it didn't have like any UVs or textures or whatever else. Like if it could generate a mesh that you could then, you know, do all of the other important steps on. Like if you could export that out, that's about as far as I care to go in the near future anyway. Because like the concern I have more is like, you know, having all of the data in order and being able to like organize that in a database and pull stuff out and whatever. Just because like even just stuff sort of figured out like over the years. What I hate is I didn't keep sources on stuff I found interesting like 8 years ago. And so it's going to be pretty impossible to find those things nowadays. But I remember stumbling across a Japanese blog post, I think, or article, I don't know which, that had Samurai Goro's model from the cutscenes for like Chapter 2, like in a screenshot. And I guess it was someone talking about the cinematics for F-Zero GX. And I didn't save the image, I didn't save the link to the article, and I regret that so hard. Because in it, I would have been able to tell what version of Maya they were using. And that would have been pretty useful. But based on a lot of the other stuff, like that's... like, of any data structure that's reoccurring in the scene files, is just, like, animation curves. But Maya calls, or at least used to call them, well, instead of like a keyframe, they called it a keyable attribute. And so I kind of have the same thing. But, you know, they use animation curves for animations, for the track data, and a bunch of other stuff too. There's some pathing data for story 2, for like the boulders. That use like a single animation curve, like per rock. Oh, and some other stuff. But yeah, so like that's the thing that I've been able to sort of pick apart, is that all of their stages were made in Maya. Yeah, that seems to be the case. That was like their authoring tool, and like it makes sense why there's no stage editor. They made all of their stages in Maya and then had a pipeline to take those stages from Maya and then convert that into data usable by the game. And that's part of why everything looked so good. Like everything's like handcrafted. And they could, set up a scene in Maya and then like export that stuff out with levels of details and whatever else. And partly that's why, like, a stage editor would not have been feasible in the timeline they have for this game. Just given that there's a lot of little, like, manual hacks that they did to, like, get some stuff to work properly or look proper. And it would make sense, right? Like, because not only do you have a team that's working on like the cinematics in Maya, then you could also build your 3D stuff in Maya and kind of like export that stuff out. And so the part of the pipeline, or part of the old pipeline, like if you look at like old F-Zero AX stages, they have a lot more of this stuff in them, and some of them are this way. It stores objects in like 2 different formats. Or I guess more specifically, one form of object has more data tied to it than like another. So in the terminology that I have, you have static scene objects and you have dynamic scene objects. Dynamic, they can have animations, they can have scrolling textures, they can have a bunch of this other stuff. And the static ones are basically like the models aren't positioned in the scene. Like every model is at the origin point and that's it. But the way, so when they started, all of the models were basically like the origin of the model is 0, so everything lines up. But they would manually have to tag a model with something like an all uppercase class underscore and then a number. And that number indicates what kind of collision property those model tris and quads would get converted to. So you'll see a lot of like N class 2, which is tagged on things that are boost pads. So it's basically just one big mesh that are like all of the boost pad colliders. And anyway, that's how they used to do that. So it was kind of chaos because you had to manually name things for the properties that it would generate in the game engine. Or I guess like in the pipeline to be used in the game engine. And so because of stuff like that, it kind of makes sense. Like, okay, yeah, like they were, building the game in a 3D modeling tool and then just kind of exporting stuff out. But I remember like one of my old professors, like that was the case. Like they made everything in 3ds Max. And then like that was your level editor. So having like integrated level editors like in Unity, like that's a modern idea, I guess, like to generate those meshes in Engine. Because like that's a whole, right? Like if you've ever used ZBrush, like frick, like just 3D, like polygon tools is like a whole complicated tool set that like most people just don't want to have to be able to make. And it kind of makes sense, like, why would you build a tool set for all this stuff when you could just, use another tool that does it 20 times better and just bring it in with a common format. This stage is so long. What's cool, so here's something. In a piece of metadata that's stored in the scene file is a pointer to a single float. And that single float tells you how long the track is in meters, right? Because every unit in this engine is representative of 1 meter. Which makes sense, right? Like that's how you get a physics engine to be proper. But this track is like 27.5 kilometers per lap. Yeah, and what's kind of crazy is the speedometer is actually correct. Like, you are actually traveling that fast. I did the math at one point where I used Blue Falcon on Twist Road to go like a near constant, like acceleration was pretty high, go a near constant 1,000 kilometers an hour. And I tried to stick to the middle of the road as much as possible because that's how it derives the length of the track. And then I did the math of like if it takes about, you know, a minute, 10 seconds to do, Twist Road is just shy of 8 kilometers per lap. And yeah, the math checked out. Just kind of crazy. Hey, no worries. I've been just playing some tracks, waiting for sort of people to show up. I don't actually have my like viewer count in front of me, so I don't actually know how many people are here, but... Oh! But yeah. So just talking a bit about some of the cool stuff that's like in the scene files, because I can, I guess. I might play like one more track or two, and then show my both cool and boring thing. The big reveal. Not that big. It's a good milestone, but... So one thing I want to do at some point is I kind of just want to make a bunch of little patches for the ROM that fix a bunch of like the little, I don't want to say like incorrect things, as if to say like that they didn't know. But like, I'll go play Twist Road just to kind of show it off. But in Twist Road, or rather, take a step back, on the GameCube, there's like different rendering modes for alpha. There's like a more processor-intensive alpha that does like an alpha multiply, right? So you see something that is transparent, you see through it, and you see all of the things behind it, including other transparent things behind it. And then there's like a cheap alpha operation that's presumably much quicker to render. That it like blocks out or it cuts out all of the alpha that's behind it. So I'm pretty sure that alpha basically writes to the Z buffer, and then it doesn't render stuff that's behind it. And that's kind of so on related to that alpha stuff. On Twist Road, there's a part of the skybox that uses the cheap alpha, and it ends up cutting off other alpha that would normally blend into it. It's probably better seen through like the test thing. So if you look at like the horizon, normally you see this really well when it like gets to be like yellow. So I'm gonna go somewhere and just wait a bunch to kind of show. Alright, so it should be visible in a little bit. Yeah, you can almost see it. If you see on like the left above the sign, you might see like a star is like cut off halfway. Darn it. Forget how long it actually takes. I don't know if I'm going to make this. Okay. Oh yeah. So, yeah. So you can kind of see that now. Here, let me get off this. Ugh. And I missed it. I'll do a lap and I'll see if it comes up. Anyway, point is, there's like some alpha clipping that at certain points kind of makes like a hard black line because of how the alpha's not being properly blended. And I know that's just like a rendering flag somewhere that could be changed. For whatever reason, I wonder if it's maybe an emulator bug then, that makes it really apparent. But anyway. Alright, I'm gonna play one more map. Which one should I play? Yeah, well, in a bit. I'm playing on console right now. Hence the, like, you know, 480p video. I don't know how visible that is because it's being scaled and everything. But... Lightning's always nice. Oh, yeah, I guess I'm just in time attack. If you have any questions about stage things, you can let me know. I don't know. I should make a trivia list at this point, but that takes time and effort, so. Well, okay, so here's one. I think I posted this a while back, but I don't know if everyone knows. So the way... So you might notice, like, at certain points in lightning, right? Like, obviously there's rain. But then there's also those lightning flashes that, like, it kind of, like, makes the stage dark to kind of emphasize the lightning. Because that's kind of like the visual effect you would get in real life, right? I'm not sure if you've noticed, but as soon as you enter, like, somewhere like here, it stops raining. And even though there's lightning, it no longer, like, makes the stage dark in the process. And the way that the game handles that is that there are, like, those trigger volumes that essentially, once you're inside the trigger, it disables rain and disables the dimming effect. But also, the way that that dimming effect happens is basically it modifies, like, the fog range value in the graphics processor, which is to say, like, anyway, you know, there's like a logarithmic or exponential drop-off on, like, for how fog is rendered, and it just uses, like, a different range. But because of that, even though the game has a value that you can modify for fog, so I can make, like, the fog value in this stage red, which is what I did, like, when I first tested. The game has it hard-coded, like, somewhere else, like, what value that fog is. So the flashes are still black, even if the fog is different. So that's interesting. Alright. What would be a good place to show? Name a stage where it's very common to crash into something. Like an object. Trying to remember. which stages have that kind of collision. This is a good one for that. Here, I'll even use Magic Seagull just to show it off. Yeah, I mean, a lot of stages are like that. Specifically, geez. Like, to put in perspective, I think Multiplex has 1,800 objects in the scene. And then anything that's Green Plant has like, I think usually 2,000 to 3,000. Okay, so here's the thing that I'm gonna show. Oh, and of course I missed things. There's a reason I chose Magic Seagull, because it normally hits everything. Right. So, you might notice that, like, collision here is not working. And there's a reason for that. The reason collision doesn't work is that every track that I've been playing right now, my tools have generated. And that's the cool thing. So there are no custom stages to be seen here. But what this means is that essentially every part of the stage file is known of, right? So it's not that everything is known, like I don't know what every bit of data in every single piece of the game is. But it means that I know enough that we can read and write stage files correctly. And the reason that that's pretty cool is it means that if you feed correct data to the data structure for a scene, it will generate a correct scene. And so anyway, basically last night at like, or I guess it would have been technically this morning EST at like 12:40. I was talking with Chemical and he pointed me to a problem that I had, which was the last problem that really prevented scenes from looking proper. It was related to pointers because of course it was related to pointers. And then just today, I fixed the last problem with Sand Ocean Lateral Shift, which is the only stage in the game that has a specific kind of data structure. I can't believe that made it to top 10. I guess it can. I didn't really play this map. And so I fixed it like another crash specifically for that stage. Which is pretty cool. So let's see. So every stage, like I can play Grand Prix, and I can play every stage. For story mode, I want to say, cool, it doesn't crash. And like to kind of prove that, like, yes, these are all my files. Let me show you like something that I haven't finished. So like 99% of everything works. The only things that okay, well, I guess that's proof enough that that doesn't work. So I guess on emulator it works. But stage 2, it's like all of the rocks just appear on the stage. But yeah, so the other thing to point out though is that I'm playing on console. Like I patched all of the files in, but the files that I generate are valid on console, which is also really, really nice. And because I've been keeping track of AX and GX differences, which basically there are three differences overall. while I haven't tested, it should work in F-Zero AX as well, because it's really only minor changes. Yeah, so like the stage that's playing right now is a stage that my file generated, which is pretty cool. Yeah, so I guess I should probably go to my PC for a bit and kind of show off what's going on there. I gotta move things. Gotta move things over for a sec. Yeah, I should. Okay. Man, I haven't streamed in forever. Let's lock those. And where is? Okay, cool. All right, and I'm even on here as well. I should probably turn on my lights. I haven't done this in a while. Cool. So I'm still hearing the game. So let me go ahead and cool. Yeah, so I specifically set up a couple things to kind of show that off. See here. Yeah, so for instance, to show that I'm not BSing, right? Let's get one merged down here. Right, so this is an original file from the Japanese version of F-Zero GX, and this is the file that I generated. And you might notice, if you can see that mine is 13 kilobytes larger. And this is the two files in WinMerge, right? So this sort of tells you, like, if the files are different, it'll tell you, like, what parts are different. And you can see it, that, at least for the most part, it's identified what's different. It's found a couple parts that are serialized the same, and I would assume that's probably mostly animation data. Because that's, no pointers are going to be different in there. There aren't any pointers in those. And so I guess I have those, but here, let's open these two because it'll make it more obvious. So if I full screen this, right? So if I go to view, go to size 4, right? This is, if you look at, like, so this is twist road. If you look at it in the binary, right? This is what you'll see. And this is the file that I generated, or that the tools that I have generated. And you can tell that it's generated by a tool because I add these comments sort of like in the file when I serialize, because it kind of really helps just see stuff. All right, so this was generated, the ones that I'm comparing anyway, right? It was generated this early morning at 12:42 and 50 seconds, right? Made by me, file information. It's saving to GX. Verbose is true, which is to say that it prints out all of the comments in the binary itself. And universal is this idea that I have for a later point where, like, one stage file can work across any version of F-Zero. Like, it doesn't matter if it's Japanese, PAL, or US or whatever. And then there's some other stuff that I didn't actually make proper, but when it's done correctly, it'll tell you, like, you can say who made the stage, right? I already have the, like, hashes for the stages that are actually made by the game, so we can compare it. Like, when it loads in a file, if it loads in a scene that was made, by the game, it'll say, like, the authors are Amusement Vision and the course name is, like, correct and all that stuff. It pulls that stuff out. But yeah, so, like, I can go sort of anywhere in the file and I can start looking at, like, okay, so this is the track checkpoint array. What it is pointed at by this address, and this is how many of these things there are in the file and stuff like that. So this is the case for, like, the whole way through. Right, so, like, at the end we have, like, the unknown, whatever the name is in my database is, like, the name that you had here. But yeah, so that's the case. So that's kind of the milestone that I'm sort of discussing anyway, right? Is um, if you give the structure any valid data, it will write out a valid file. And if you want it to read a stage in, it can do that correctly. So in like the last week, I wrote a lot of tests to see like, am I accidentally overwriting existing parts of the file? When I read a file in and save it out and read it in again, are the values the same? And if not, that's because like I'm probably saving things in the wrong order, or the pointers aren't pointing in the wrong spot. So after writing a couple tools and refactoring like half of the tools that I had for like being able to look at stuff, basically I really quickly got to a point where everything worked except for the objects in the scene. They weren't loading correctly. Yeah, and then Chemical, I sent a file to him, and he was like, "Oh yeah, this is like an array pointer, and that's the one thing I had wrong." So once I fixed that, everything worked. But yeah, so there isn't necessarily like a ton more to discuss, other than like, yeah, it's fun because basically what that means now that everything is like working, is for one, I think that the data structures that I fixed last, I'm probably gonna have a bit more of a look at, because I think it's like the level of details, which makes sense where that works. I had like previous theories that like the level of detail was tied to where you were on the track and stuff. I don't think that's the case anymore, because stuff works. Yeah, but once that's done, I already have tools, or rather, I guess, like I already have scripts, right? So in Unity, I can already load in the stage file and create like a Unity scene out of the F0GX scene, which is say like all the objects are in the same spot and they have the data of the things that were pulled. And I technically, though I didn't actually do it much, I already have this like pipeline where like I can generate a scene from an F0GX scene file or AX scene file. And I already have sort of a framework for taking all of the data out of the scene and putting it into the correct data structures for the scene file, and then being able to save that out. So that's sort of already, I guess, mostly done. I know I broke things recently, so like I wouldn't be able to just go in and like try it out. But what's nice is once, like, that's the next step. The next step is going to be load everything into a Unity scene and then just save it back out and make sure that that's correct. Because once that's done, I can start building tools to author content in Unity and then export that stuff out. And sort of what I was discussing at the beginning with Panzer is that, like, the only thing left is like, oh, generate like some track data. And that's basically it. Like, if I had a week, where I could just do this, I could probably just have that. And because I know of all of the parts of the scene file that actually deal with the track data itself, that wouldn't be too hard. Because like some things is so that the hierarchy of objects that create the track data is very stupid. In that, like, it's just kind of ridiculous. Again, it kind of goes back to the discussion at the beginning where like they were using Maya. So I'm pretty sure in Maya, right? Like if you're familiar with like 3D stuff, right? Like there's like a modifier stack, right? Where like you can layer on different sort of modifications and it transforms all the vertices and stuff like that, or parts of it. At least like when I had like a 3D modeling course in college to kind of understand like the pipeline. It was a game design course, but it was part of it to like understand what the process is. And we used 3ds Max. And a 3ds Max is like a modifier stack. So I'm not 100% sure about Maya, but I would assume it's the same thing. Anyway, so my understanding of how the track data was authored is it's just this like modification stack on like these splines that kind of transform stuff. And because of that, like I'm guessing that their tool, like they looked at like the Maya manual, and they said how the hell is this information organized so that they can convert it to F0GX. And whatever the tool does is probably just reading it, and then the game has a thing to interpret that. So they didn't have to go and like make their own stuff, right? But because of that, you can have this like compounded layer of like a lot of different stacks on that stuff, and it's a convoluted hierarchy where you can like have a transform, and the transform has an animation curve, and that animation curve is also a transform that you like interpolate across, basically. But that transform, right? You can have a hierarchy of objects and they all transform the things below it, right? That's what that hierarchy is. You can have multiple transforms that like offset where the animation curve starts, and then you multiply the matrices or something, and then you find the child, and then like it has that transform that it then multiplies against its own transform, and then its animation curve, and so on and so forth. So you can basically have this thing where like an animation curve moves the track to the left, and then you have another animation curve that like corrects it to the right. And then you have to do some stupid multiplication stuff to figure out what the final transform is. The nice thing about the format is that you don't actually need to engage with the hierarchy. You could actually just make an animation curve where the transform is just at the origin point and the scale is 1. And then you can make an animation curve that just stores all of that transform data correctly, and then you could just interpolate across the one animation curve to get some track data. And so that's why it's not going to be too hard to actually get to that next step of having track data. Because I have, to be honest, like I don't get quite how you're supposed to like compute the final transformations with the data that they have. But what I know is I don't actually have to use that data. Because if you look at some of the other tracks, so for instance, if you look at stage 44, which is chapter 8, it basically only has one root transform for the entire track. Because if you remember, story 8, it's a single circuit. There's no breaks. There's like nothing kind of crazy going on. So you can actually make a complete circuit with one animation curve. What's weird about it, though, is that it goes deep. It goes like 5 or 6 layers deep. But again, that's not necessary, which is kind of nice. The only thing that's necessary out of that hierarchy is essentially there are some like subnodes in the transform hierarchy that embed data directly in the track, and that's pretty convenient. So for instance, Mute City Twist Road, when you go over like a heel strip, the data that represents the area where it heals you is not stored as quads and triangles. It's stored as a different set of animation curves that get superimposed onto the track's own collision data. So basically it would, if you think of like the circuit as a percentage, 0% is you're at the start, and 100% is you've gone all the way through the track and you're at the end, right? So if you know LERPs, like linear interpolations, that should sort of ring a bell. But anyway, so if you have this value of 0 to 1 or 0% to 100%, those modifications for like superimposing like healing or gravel or ice or lava or whatever is basically an animation curve that just says like that the heal strip starts and stops at a certain percentage along the track. And then it has a width value that basically I'm forgetting right now what exactly the value is, but It might be between -5 and, sorry, negative 0.5 and 0.5. Which is to say, like, you have the track in the middle at 0, and then the left would be -5, and the right would be positive 0.5. But basically then, at that point, the data just specifies a width. So it'll say, like, from negative 0.5 to negative 0.25 or something. And that would represent a quarter of the width of the track at that particular point has that property. And so what's convenient about that is we don't actually have to serialize triangles and quads to represent any collision property on the track that we want. And that's super, super convenient. The caveat being, though, and this is actually something I'd have to look into, because now that I think about it, I neither confirmed nor denied this one thing. So that's really convenient. Okay, getting back on track. So I have an idea of how to make the animation data for the track to work. Great. From that, then we can generate, a model or whatever, and then maybe you texture it and stuff with like chemicals tools and Blender or something. Great. We can inject, essentially, like through the means that the game has, we can inject properties onto the track, such as healing, slip, growl, whatever else, using their data format. There's a benefit to doing it that way. One is that it takes up significantly less space in the file. If you save things out as triangles and quads, it generates a lot of data and it takes a lot of space. And then that data also has to be put into this like partitioned map of the track. Because if you know like binary partition trees or binary trees, I forget exactly what it is. But anyway, like that way out for a game to kind of split up space into multiple sections so that when it's doing collision detection, it doesn't have to check against everything, but only a subset based on the locality that it is in. There's a similar sort of thing that the game does for triangles and quads. And while I know how that stuff works, it's kind of a pain in the butt. It takes up, like, so that kind of collision data as triangles and quads can take up to like 95% of the file, right? So again, stage 44, there's a collision mesh around the entire track so that if you fall off the track, you blow up, right? Because you're sort of in this cave or whatever. The reason the file is like 1 point something megabytes is because it's all of those triangles and quads taking up that space. Anyway, so we don't need that, at least to have things in the track, which makes it super convenient. The downside is that currently I don't actually know how to compute a triangle or quad, because the data itself for those things basically pre-computes the collision space. So think of it this way, right? Like when you actually compute, like, is this triangle intersecting with this other triangle, right? Like, or is this point intersecting with this triangle, or is it close enough, or whatever the heck the game does, right? There's this problem where, there's a bunch of math that has to get done to figure out, like, if one thing's colliding with the other thing. And something that most every game that I know does is that normally a lot of this stuff requires like the square root of something, right? So if like calculate the hypotenuse, it's the width and height, each to the power of 2, you add those two together and then you square root the sum, and then you have like the length of the hypotenuse, right? So calculating distances between stuff, like the distance of a point to the 3 different points of a triangle, or something like that. Anyway, right? You would be doing that like 3 times. And so what games typically do is that they don't do that square root part, because a square root can be like in the grand scheme of math computations on a computer, is heavier. So what most games do is they compare the non-square rooted distance of stuff to other non-square rooted distances of stuff. And because usually what you're checking anyway is just, is it greater than or less than? And so you don't actually need to do the square root to be able to know if the math is correct. And so anyway, I'm pretty sure the triangles have some form of non-square rooted vertices, basically. And I had some like test scene where I could sort of poke at that, and that kind of seems to be the case. And because I don't understand how those initial values are generated, because all of that's saved in the game. So it's like there's one value I still don't know. There's all the vertices of the triangle or the quad, and then there's all of the vertices of the triangle or the quad, but pre-computed for the calculation. And it saves all of that stuff. Or at least I think it's a pre-computed value. Otherwise, like, I don't know what the hell it is. It kind of follows the shape of the thing, but in a really weird and stupid way anyway. Not quite correct. But anyway, because I don't understand that, and that's something that I know I'm not going to be able to brute force. Like the decomposed rotations, I was able to brute force. But this other stuff I know I won't be able to. And because of that, storing collision meshes, even though, like, again, my files, right, like, it saved it out correctly. So I know the data structure is correct, but I can't feed it correct data yet, because I don't know how to feed it correct data. I don't know how to compute the data correctly. Anyway, because that's kind of the case, what that means is that we can't actually have boost pads in the near future. Like, I'm sure in the far future we'll figure this out eventually, but in the near future, for whatever I get working, boost pads won't work because all of the boost pads in the game, currently anyway, are stored as triangles and quads on the track, like in this whole other complicated system, which is kind of a bummer. The thing that I was realizing though earlier is that I never actually checked to see if there's just an integer property value on the embedded track data. Because if it's just the integer value and they line up with all of the other properties, it might technically be possible to kind of cheese it and use different animation curves to basically create triangles on the track or quads on the track for boost pads. And that would be kind of both hilarious and amazing. And I mean, that kind of just means that the game has a really robust system for this stuff, which is kind of neat. But yeah, anyway. So like that's kind of that, I guess. But yeah, so I'll probably be sharing the files later. If anyone wants to just poke around and sort of see that I'm not BSing and load it up in an emulator. Or you can rebuild the ROM, like I did, to try and fool everyone, I guess. But yeah, so I don't know, I feel like I'm just rambling. But that's the case. So part of me kind of wishes, like, again, I don't have a custom stage file yet. I would hope that I have one in the next month. And part of that's just because, like, I might have to look out for work. I might see if I can, like, do a donation thing. Because, as mentioned at the beginning, I did quit my job. So if I can support myself for maybe an extra month, then I can put more time towards this stuff. Yeah. So, yeah, real. I guess for anyone else who's coming in and might be wondering what the heck I'm blathering about. So I'll switch scenes really quickly Wrong one. This one. So the cool and boring reveal is that every track that, if you want, you can tell me to play a specific track. Let's do Thunder Road because it's always great. Every track in this build of the game, if you will, in this ROM, was generated by the tools that I make. So basically what's going on is my tool loads in a real file, right? A real stage file, and then it saves it back out. So like the file is, in a sense, completely different, because, I made it, all of the pointers are different, where stuff is saved is different. But the output file is treated the exact same by the game, which means that, the tools that I have are now at a point where all the data is saved out correctly. In a sense, that's not totally true. There's a couple things that aren't working, like object-based collision. I guess I never explained that. I was playing Port Town Long Pipe earlier, and I was Magic Seagull, and I was just clipping through stuff that should have collision. So the game saves collision in 3 places. There's like the track data, right? Which, as mentioned before, you can embed different things. Or like you could embed, for instance, like this hill strip. I forget if it's quads or triangles, or if it's like an animation curve embedded in the track. Right, so you can... Animation curves in the track is one form of collision. Triangles and quads in this giant table is a form of collision. But then also, objects themselves can have their own collision mesh sort of tied to them. And that's the third one. And that one doesn't work right now for some reason, even though I checked before streaming today and the pointers are all correct. And the data seems to be all correct. So I'm not sure what's going on. But yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, but that's the case. If I grab, let's see, of course, I am going to change my input for a second. I can show some stuff in Unity. I really wish the monitors I had were easier for switching input. There should just be a button to do that. Yeah, so everything except for that collision, I think, is correct. So, yeah, I got a ton of stuff going. That was me fixing a bug before. But yeah, so if there's any... Here, I could probably make sure that whatever the heck I have generated is up to date. And hopefully nothing breaks in the process. So we go here. If I import all of these things, yeah, I mean, part of it is I have to actually, make some of the tools. For the most part, it's Unity. I mean, like, part of me wishes I could, like, I had a course. I had a course in college. Oh, type of system exception was thrown. Of course. I can't actually do this because I was dumb and yeah, so it's going to be empty. Okay. Is it empty? Yeah, it's empty. Okay. Well, I'll have to fix that after. I can't generate scenes right now because I changed the profile of an object, and as a result, that kind of breaks everything. But I guess for the scenes that I do currently have generated, right, like I can show that stuff off or whatever. But yeah, so I guess the idea here, going back to some points earlier, is that I can generate a scene, right? And I can click on an object, and that object, for instance, I have like a GFC scene object, and the data is probably wrong right now, but the idea being that when I generate the scene, I grab all the data out and I put it on stuff, and at one point there's going to be something where you can kind of just go here and like export the scene back out. I finally have like a proper pane for all of these things. I used to, if anyone used my tools before, there was always these stupid scriptable objects you had to go click on and set things up for and whatever. I've removed that. There's now just a window that you can set up paths for different things, and things just kind of work. But yeah, so I guess one thing is if anyone wants to start learning things for whatever, I mean, I'm sure at some point too, Chemical's probably going to have some stuff, and the longer I do this, the more I think it might be better at some point to just have everything in Blender. I'm not totally sure yet. Like the one advantage that Unity provides is that you can build tools pretty easy, right? Because you can just write C# and have that do stuff. And you'll probably have more direct access to data, maybe. But then the other thing too is that on a large scale, and like again, part of the reason I'm sticking to Unity is you can oftentimes there are like tools made, right, for like a hack for, I don't know, Super Mario Sunshine. I remember that's the thing. I don't know what the tool set is, but like because often those people are, I guess, real programmers. They'll use like C or something or C++, and they'll make their entire toolkit like from scratch. And that's great, but it tends to have the adverse effect where everything they make is only for one game. And then it's also kind of obtuse, right? And often it's like you can kind of hack a stage together or level together, but it doesn't give you the toolkit to manage every single stage in a game simultaneously and like maintain references and other stuff like that. And this is the one thing that working in Unity does, is there's an actual asset database. Everything that gets generated is put into the asset database. So you can pull stuff out, you can add stuff in, you can share things across scenes, you can sort of, have a tool that goes through every scene and be like, what are actually all of the objects being used and how does it divvy it up between like the different files and stuff. So anyway, we'll see where that goes. But yeah, in terms of like using Unity, again, part of me kind of wishes like, hey, take this college course. It's not really something you can just do directly. But like the main thing to realize, I guess, is that like Unity is a tool. And because of that, it asks you to think about the tool in a specific way, right? It's not 3D modeling software, for instance, right? So if you're used to how that works, it's not quite the same. And that like there's going to be a lot of stuff in Unity that like I don't use. Because the thing to point out is like Unity is a game engine. I'm using it as an editor, right? Like I never actually build code for Unity. Like I don't make a build of anything, right? I'm just using the framework to do all the other stuff, which is kind of like a weird hack in a lot of ways. And so part of what I've been doing, what I did over the summer, was trying to separate my code from Unity as much as possible so that you could theoretically pull out all of the scripts and make your own standalone application. Because I do think that would be a benefit. Like, don't lock it all into Unity. So all the Unity editor stuff is on its own, but all of like the data structures just for the data can sort of be on their own and separate. But yeah, I guess like that's the one thing that's like, not pictured in today's stuff is in June. I think it was June of last year. It's like 6 months ago. I got to spend like a full month working on this stuff like full time before I got like a bit burnout. So one thing to point out is it's not just like, oh yay, today things work. It's like, oh no, I've been working on this code base for 4 years, and I don't know how many commits I put in last year. Um, but it's probably like 150 maybe. I don't know. It's a lot. It's a lot of stuff. But yeah, so I guess part of it is stay tuned. Decoupling data structures from Unity-specific logic is a good way to approach the project's architecture. Yeah, that's kind of the idea. Um, and that's part of the reason I'm moving away from scriptable objects. At the beginning, I guess tangent sort of here, but so something I did to kind of help with the development or the reverse engineering of the data structures was I made it so that every structure could be wrapped in a scriptable object. And the reason I did that was you could load in data once, which was like the long part of the process, and then I could edit scripts that would generate log files and tables, like Excel files or whatever, from those scriptable objects. And it could do that much quicker because all of the data was already serialized in Unity, so I didn't have to read it out and like do conversions and endingness crap. And so it made it really quick to iterate on the logging stuff because I didn't have to reload stuff like all the time because it was in the asset database and I could do that. The downside though is that in having it be a serialized asset in Unity, I have to conform to all of Unity's asinine serialization stuff, right? Like the serialized property tag has to be on everything. Like right now in my code, everything is a public variable, which is a horrible idea in a lot of ways. But the reason everything is sort of like a public variable was so that I could iterate quickly on like the data structure and all this other stuff. But yeah, so like in recent times, I started using Unity's mathematics library. So instead of using vector3s, I use float3s because that library is open source. So you could technically rip it out and it stands on its own, right? So you could rip it out and include it with something. And then anytime there's a float3, right? All of that stuff is already done. And obviously smart people at Unity are maintaining that. And so, works well. But yeah. So I guess part of it is hopefully I have time in like the next couple weeks to start chipping away at like the tools to get stuff done. And then I can sort of show a proof of concept stage that kind of, I already have like a little sketch done of like, oh, I'm going to make this kind of a track. Just that I can like embed all of the different properties and stuff on it to make sure that all that stuff is working to show it off. But yeah, because a lot of it too is, again, like I still don't know a ton about the data, but right, not everything is known, but everything is known of, right? So I don't know how everything works, but I know where everything is and what shape it takes, right? Yeah, okay, so Unreal, yeah, next steps. So next steps really is now that I can read and write out files on their own, I'm going to read files in, generate my own scene, and then save that stuff back out. Because once that's done, it means that you can edit things in Unity and it shows up in the scene file in the game. So that's the next step. The step after that is to make my own track data, right? Like my own animation curves. And that's going to take a bit of time to do because even though conceptually it's pretty easy, like to make an animation curve and then to sample it at different points and whatever else, that's easy enough. But what's tied to that and what's going to take a bit more time is generating a model from that, because it means I have to like hand generate a model from that animation data. what I can do to begin with is probably just make like rails and like the box. Because what's really interesting and kind of weird is the game does actually define a thickness for the track, right? So if you play Story 2, you know how like you can go off the side and you like never really go into like, I don't know, the mountain, the cliff, the whatever. The reason for that is the game makes it like 500 units thick or something stupid like that. But that's the thing. So like different tracks can actually have like different thicknesses. And so I think like anyway, whatever. It's a thing you know now, right? Anyway, so I can generate the box of the track and I can generate the walls because that's another interesting thing, right? Like the walls of the track are dynamic and you can save that out, and you would know that if you play Port Town Erudite, right? Like after the constant steps, there's like that one really tall wall for like that next part of the track, right? But anyway, so I can generate a model out, and on the upside, like I understand how all the model data is saved. Like I understand how that works, right? Like you can see that I understand how that works because we have have the models in here, right? Those wouldn't be in there if I didn't know what format they were in. So I can save those back out. And one thing that I want to do, again, I do not care for authoring unique content. I'm not interested in making different textures for tracks. I'm not interested in making different models for tracks. I'm not interested in making different venues for tracks. All really cool stuff. But that's not something that I need to care about. At least not for like a few years anyway. So all I need to know is what are the actual materials used on tracks, and what are the properties of those things, and what textures do they use and stuff like that. Like one thing that I had done at one point and it is now dead, and I would have to do it again, is I used to have TPLs and GMAs. I used to be able, or I guess TPLs was the only one I really did before, but to make a file structure that in Unity, and this would be a scriptable object, but like to make a, that was it, like a TPL, so it's a texture, I always call it texture pack library, it's texture palette library. Anyway, right, so those files need to be generated, for instance, because there's like indexing and stuff, and GMAs for like the course need to be generated and stuff. So I need to go and re-implement those so I can save those out again. And then once I have those 3D models, I can export that out. I was thinking earlier, I think I have an idea of how I could do that, because what I would want to do is basically find all of the defaults for everything in the game. And for instance, for fog, like that was something I did, which, fun fact, every stage in Greenplant has a different fog. Okay. Once I have all of the defaults, like what material, like how the material for the track is constructed and all these other things, I can actually save those out as predefined things. And so when you go to generate a track, it can immediately like make the shape of the track, the height of the rails of the track, and the textures and everything of the track be what it is like in the retail game. And that's what I care for, to be able to generate a track that looks like what's in the game, sort of like right off the bat. So that's going to take a bit of time before I can really like finish that stuff. But that's kind of like what I'm going for, is like I was never interested in don't get me wrong, making old venues and new models to put in that and animations and whatever is cool. But the ironic thing is I started this project because I wanted to make levels, like from a level designer perspective. And and then 8 years go by and here I am, right? Like doing all this other stuff. But like that's what I want to get towards, is I want to make it so that you can generate that stock stuff on your own. And then if, with chemical tools, for instance, then you can go and make new models, and you'd be able to import that into my tools and work it out, and that would, like, everything would work. That would be fine. Just my tool wouldn't be for authoring that stuff. But yeah. Let's see a couple things I missed. Yep. Which one? Yeah, no worries. I mean, support is a nice thing, and validation is also a nice thing. Yeah. But right, so that's kind of like what I'm going for. The secret thing, I guess I'll spoil it because that makes sense. So in the summer, because I was burnt out working on GX stuff, I talked to the person that made the F-Zero X editor because I tried to figure out what that is. And my God, so here, let me show you. I can show you this on screen because this is a thing that's here. Right, so these are all of those. So if we look at, for instance, right, so I have this folder called GameCube. So again, the idea with my toolset is that I could start modding other games, right? And a lot of the common tools would sort of be in here. So GFC, right? Because that's the game code, right? It's GFC JEP, right? For different regions, and then 01 if it's GameCube, and then 8P if it's F-Zero AX. So GFC is just, you know, an all-encompassing thing. Right? So if I look at specifically just tracks, this is how many different data structures are in there. Right? So if I go ahead and look at this, let's see, 66. I have 66 different files. And that just represents the scene. And this is part of the reason why this took forever. There's 66, like, at least 66 different, like, data structures in here. And probably, you know, probably 20 of them would be what I call small. There's probably 10 of them that are, like, huge, disgusting, gigantic messes. And that's just kind of like what it is. And then the rest is kind of in between, right? And so just like, and like, let's not forget here, there's no models, there's no textures, there's nothing else. This is just the scene file to say where things are placed and what the collision is. That's it. Right? So then if, you know, because if I go back to GameCube and I look at GX, so GX is the graphics processor, you know, what I have is these things here are what are needed to, like, generate a display list for F-Zero GX. So there's not necessarily a lot of these, but they're typically pretty big things, and it's kind of disgusting, right? And then the GMA file, right, which is like that, is 34, right? So a model file in F-Zero GX is 34 different things that hinges off like a dozen other things that is like just hardware level stuff, right? That's what it takes to make a stage in F-Zero GX. Let's look at the N64, right? So if we look at F-Zero X, this is everything. This is absolutely everything that it takes to make a stage in F-Zero X. There's not even 20. And most of these are enumerations. They're not even like structures. They're just enumerations listing like what thing you want to use. Like a course itself, right? Here, let's compare, right? A course in F-Zero X, it's that. That's it. That's all it takes. You got a couple arrays of different things. You got some control points. That's it. And then if we look at F-Zero GX, right? So this is the disgusting mess that it is. And everything that's a pointer here is this. And some of those things I actually have to pull out to manage them more specifically. Right? So this is what it takes. And then for instance, if I want to read that file out, like this is the code, like starting from here, from 242, like this is me reading out all of those different things. I have to untangle a bunch of mess stuff. I got to untangle the track data. Boom. So it's 220 lines just to read out the data. And then to save it at 462, right? Again, saving out a bunch of things in different orders, and I gotta pull stuff out, and then I gotta reserialize a bunch of stuff, right? So that's like 500. It takes like 500 lines to save out a file. It takes 200 lines to read in a file. And with F0GX, like less than 100 lines of code does everything. So I'll do that in a sec. So point being, in a day, I can write every data structure that goes in an F0X stage. And if I knew, right, because the advantage is I knew everything that went in. If I knew everything that went to an F0GX stage, it would take me probably a couple weeks to like properly read things in and out. So anyway, part of the reason I have this, and a thing to keep in mind, like why was it easier to edit F0X compared to GX, I think. Part of it is scope, right? Like it's very different in scope. F0GX is much, much larger. But also F0X was made to have a stage editor. And so the data you feed to the stage editor is made for a stage editor, right? It's some enumerations. You get to check off some boxes, click on some things, give it some control points, and it auto-generates the track geometry for you, right? Like you don't need models, you don't need textures, whatever. You just select that from like a list and it's done, because that's the kind of system they built. Again, with F0GX, because everything was in Maya and there's this huge, massive pipeline in between it and the game, you can't just ship Maya with the game and say, okay, then use our tools. But because of that, and because I have a fairly good idea of how this works, I am at some point in the not too distant future going to write a tool. And this is the whole point. Like the reason my project is called Manifold. Manifold means many ways. And the idea is that you can start laterally converting data across games. So the idea is that it can, with a couple of heuristics built in, you can generate F0GX stages from F0X stages. So it means any custom stage you made for F0X, you can import into F0GX. Now, just because you can do that doesn't actually mean the tracks will be good, right? Like the games work fundamentally differently, so you would have to change the stage. But it would be a great starting point, right, to be able to bring that stuff in, and then you can sort of tweak some stuff around and then test it out and see what it's like and stuff like that. So it'd be pretty cool. So anyway, that's going to be coming in not too long. That would be kind of cool, I suppose, but yeah, FGX is, I mean, it would, other games have the benefit of being more popular, right? Like Super Mario 64 and Ocarina of Time and stuff. I'm really jealous that they have like full decompilations, because oh my god, would that help reverse engineering so hard. Because one thing I kind of realized only later is the whole of my reverse engineering efforts have been statistical analysis, which is pretty good in a lot of ways, because I can figure out like what is every version of everything that exists, and that has a lot of uses. But it has its shortcomings too, which is like when you don't know where the problem is, you just no way to find it. You kind of have to guess, and that's part of why it took so long. But I started using Ghidra, poking around. I named things in one function, and it kind of makes sense now. But anyway, I mean, it depends. Like it kind of doesn't. Once there's again like. Part of it, right, is not just making something, but making tools that are scalable, right? So that you can make a tool that is good at producing a bunch of different things. And I'm kind of excited. Unity has like some new UI stuff that it can do to make custom editor tools just for the tracks, and that's going to be pretty fun. Um, but yeah, so but I guess so. Before I forget, there was a comment that I don't want to get buried. Um, yeah, okay, so differences between what is in the background and stage files. So basically, the stage file is a scene file, right? Like the Cully course is more of a scene file. Like it has collision in it, but its primary goal is to be a scene, right? So like if you use 3D editing software, like the idea is that like you make a new scene and then you put in the like you make the stage and you put in the props and whatever if you think like theater and whatnot. It's like that, right? You just kind of place objects in an environment. And so the way that the game is really doing that though is that all of the models that go in this stage are saved in their own archives, right? And there's this nice level of abstraction that the game has, right? So you have super common things that are used in every track, right? Or like in the race.gma, right? Because that's like the 3, 2, 1 countdown, right? Like that's in there and stuff. Um, and then you have a slightly less generic file, which is like the venue, right? So for any stage that is Mute City, there's an archive with all of the models that a Mute City stage could possibly use. And then you have, again, one file that's even less generic, which is what are all the models unique to that specific stage, right? So that's your like sto1.gma, which will have like specifically the models for the track. And if you're multiplex, right, it'll have Rob included in there so we can put it off to the side and be fun and whatever. So all of those models are in their own archive. And then the scene file just says, like, this object that's placed here with this scale with this whatever else is the model with this name. And then when the game loads, it reads the name from what it says in the scene file and it loads it out of the archive that gets loaded with the stage at the same time. And then there's the other stuff, right? And then that file also has all of the collision data stored in there. And then it has some of those visual effect triggers and some of the other stuff that I don't quite understand, but that's the thing. Yeah, so the Cully underscore course number is the stage file, but more aptly called the scene file, because it kind of just says where everything is placed and what the collision is and stuff like that. So, yeah, it's kind of funny. So the collision file is also the scene file, and the scene file is also the collision file. And it also has the metadata to handle visual effects, right? So it's kind of a everything in the kitchen sink except for models is kind of what it is. So, yeah. Yeah, maybe. I mean, again, I'm gonna share these things later, so it's like it's a proof. It's proof that we're at least at this point where this stuff works. So yeah, I guess anyway. I think that's I don't want to say it like it's it for me as far as I know, unless anyone else has any questions you'd like to know. But um, thank you. Yeah, it has taken a lot of time, but the exciting part is that probably the hardest part is done. Like there are still like don't get me wrong, there are still hard things to do. Um, but there's like so much more visibility on what those things are than at the start. Because I still remember like opening up the file and just seeing a bunch of pointers and not understanding what a pointer was, and then being like, this file is impossible to decipher. And 8 years later, here I am, and I'm like, yeah, know where sort of every chunk of thing is in the scene. But yeah, again, I think it's going to take Gidra to hunt down the collision detection stuff, and Chemical might actually know where that is based on some of the stuff he was posting a while back with like how the game detects collision. Because if he has that function or those functions plural figured out, it might have the correct math to transform the point of the player vehicle into the same space as what is uh, like pre-cached. And if that math is in there, then you could basically do that same math on your own vertice points, and you'd get the same data, and then that would like solve that. So basically, once we can figure out how to make triangles and quads for collision, everything that I care about is there. In the sense that, like you, with that much knowledge, you can make a stage like any other stage in the game, for the most part. Like I'm not gonna care about branching for a little while. Like I don't care. I don't care enough anyway. Um, about that branching stuff. And like pipes and half pipes and stuff like that. I have a general idea of how that stuff works. But like it's gonna take me probably a good couple weeks of staring at and testing things with that like object hierarchy for different types of tracks. Like what's nice is I know how to make gaps in the track. I know how to have a track move different places, but I already know what it would take to modify the surface of the track, right? If I want it, if you think like lightning and it's got like that kink that's like up and then it goes down. If you think of Sand Ocean, what's the first one? Sand Ocean, not lateral shift, it's the other one. What was it? It's Surface Slide, right? Surface Slide has that like crazy sort of bent track part. Like I know how that's done. Fire field undulation, all those things. Like I know how that data is represented, so it's not too hard to make a flat track with all those things. It would just be a matter of then understanding like, okay, how do you make a half pipe? How do you make a full pipe? And part of the advantage, by the way, I think, of being able to do it through this stuff is that, again, what I care about is making data that looks like what was in the original game. So making a tool that knows how to generate an entrance to a pipe or an entrance to a half pipe, because there's a very specific way that it shapes that cylinder, which I forget who it was, but someone had a problem with that when they were modeling it. It's like, again, my hope is that the tool would just sort of do that. And then again, if you wanted to, it's going to save it out as a GMA, so you can take Chemical's tool, load into GMA in Blender, and then you could do anything else that you would want to with Green. But anyway, that's kind of that. Things. I mean, I almost don't want them to leak the source to GX, if only because I would want to be able to get far enough that like there's no legal ambiguity. 8 years ago, I would have loved for them to leak the source, but I've already sunk my spare time over the last 8 years into this, so I'll do that. One thing I do want to do at one point is reach out to some of the level designers from the game and see if they wouldn't mind doing like a small interview to ask them like what stages they made and what their process was from it. Again, like it's like from a game design perspective, there's some things I want to do there. But part of what I want to do is I want to show them that I can make stages first to sort of warrant why they might want to talk about it. But yeah, because like one of them was at a Ubisoft in Sweden, I think. He was like a level designer there or something. More senior. He was on LinkedIn. So I was like, okay, cool. I'd probably be able to do this stuff and connect, but might not be for a little bit, but might also not. It's probably going to be this year. Again, I tend to see stuff in chat of being like GX stages are super far away, and over the summer, like I try to keep it a secret. And if I figured like I'd talk to Chemical and kind of get some stuff. But if I could have figured that out on my own, then I could have kept this all a secret. But um, I think it's probably better this way anyway. Um, but yeah, like I would think that like so two things. One, will there be a custom stage this year? I think yes. Like this 12 months. I'd probably be able to get that done. Um, will you be able to make a stage? I'm gonna say yes. Will you be able to make a stage in which the data is conserved as I update things? Probably not. I'm very good at breaking stuff, making breaking changes to what I do, because I'll do it one way and then it stays there for a year, and then I come back, you know, a year or two later and I look at that and I'm like, there's a totally better structure to do this thing, and I just kind of blow it up and make my own stuff. But if you're using anything that I make, you're going to be serializing stuff in Unity, and if I break that serialization, it's like you could spend a million hours making a stage and you'll never be able to use the new tools that I make because it'll probably just break stuff in the process. At a certain point, like, you know, once everything's built enough and good enough, then I'll probably start worrying about breaking people's stuff, especially if it's like minor changes. But that's not going to be for. I'm going to say there's not going to be like a full suite to edit any any stage to any amount for probably a couple of years anyway. And the other thing to mention too is you're not going to be able to edit existing stages. That's something I guess I haven't sort of mentioned. Like, again, there's a stupid hierarchy of transformations. Maybe someone's going to care enough to figure that out. I don't care enough to figure that out. So you'll be able to import those stages, but you won't be able to export the track data back out, edited, using tools that I make. You know, you'd probably have to make your own stuff. It's too complicated. It's too stupid. You know, yeah. Again, there's stuff that I have to figure out, and that would take me a couple months, solid, just to figure that stuff out, so I don't care. So I'm going to do it the cheap way that's going to get stuff working anyway. You know, technically you could recreate that stage data, but it's not going to be one-to-one. It's going to be very hard for it to be one-to-one. But anyway, yeah, whatever. Yeah, so anyway, things to come. Probably. Cool. Some things I missed. I mean, so for instance, if it was just a matter of adding triangles to the map, once that's figured out, yes, you could do that. You could do that and you could export that out and that would work fine. More specifically, I'm talking about like the actual track animation data, like the spline, right? Like that's an animation curve. That data, I'm not interested in figuring out how it works in the form that it currently is. I understand how it works in a simplified form, right? And that's what I'm going to be doing. But in its complicatedness, that's that. Yeah, I mean, like right now, like all of those triangles are going to be in a table, like for jump plates and stuff. And since I don't know how to construct a proper triangle or quad, yeah, that wouldn't be possible. The interesting thing is, right, like, it almost seems like the game says, like, are you close enough to the triangle or quad to give it the effect? And not like, are you actually intersecting with it? For those things specifically, because in Casino Palace Double Branches, the jump pads are actually just flat quads, like on the track. And then other tracks actually have like the triangle shape. It's kind of funny. Yeah, again, that I don't have stuff that would let you be able to do that for a while. But also, I don't care. To be honest, like I don't care about editing existing tracks. I want to make new tracks. That's the whole point of these tools, right? So I just have to use all of the existing tracks to get out enough data to figure out what it's doing. So, but again, it's like everything's going to be there. It's going to be, it's open source, and people can, figure out how it works and then document it and then implement some kind of thing that converts it into something usable in the editor, and then you could edit it. But, you know, I've already spent the last 8 years of my spare time on this other stuff. I'm not going to waste it on things that get in the way of actually making stuff. Yeah. Yeah, so like if you've played multiplex and you've gone up and you start flying and you're going down and you go right over the lip and there's the boost pad there, and you don't hit it but you go over and you get the boost anyway. It's part of whatever's going on there, which is kind of interesting. But anyway. See, I could probably move this to somewhere that I look more at the camera. Which boost pad on port 10 cylinder wave? Because part of what might be interesting is checking if it might actually be misaligned. Cylinder wave is 33. Yes, it is. If I go and look at static boost. Sharp corner before the split. Let's have a look. No, it seems pretty properly aligned. So, yeah, it might just be the way the collision sort of works with that. But yeah, it's mapped pretty one-to-one with boost pad. Inside the corner? Oh, this guy. Let's see. I mean, this one doesn't look like it's doing anything weird either. It might just be that, right? So if you see like the collision is like a flat plane and it's not actually on. So it might just be that like you're sort of to the side of it a bit. Jeez, this is unnecessarily funky. Yeah. So it might just be that. Yeah. It's kind of funny. Part of what I want to do as a mod, me saying like I don't want to edit existing tracks, and then also me like this is the one thing I want to edit. But this is more because it bugs me. So it's it's this boost pad. It right, it kind of looks like it's very much like off of the track, and it's very apparent because like the diameter is so small, right? But what you could do is you could actually remodel the base of this to have the correct curve, and you could modify the name of that other model and what's referenced in the scene to use that new one. And you could leave the collision intact, right? So you don't actually have to modify the collision, right? So like this yellow part, it would exist the same, but the model would be different around it. So it would look correct, but it would not affect the collision. So in theory, right, like it would be valid for time attack because all of the collision is exactly the same. It would just be like minor cosmetic changes in that sense. Or like if you think about it like in terms of when you play the track, you'd be playing the same track that just looks slightly different. But yeah. Yeah, because there's some stuff too, right? So I guess back to that point, like that stage, that would be something to fix. I think it's stage 17. This is undulation. Is it 15? Yeah, right. So if I move over here for a second, right, and if I look at triggers for visual effects, right, like there's this trigger here, which if I, oh my goodness. Yeah. So, whoops. Yeah, it's this trigger. So you'll notice that there's the circle here. That's the actual pipe. And this big volume here is a trigger to activate animations that go after it. But you'll notice that it is centered on the lower part here. So that's like the flat part of the track, right? And the trigger, what am I looking at? Where am I looking at? Yeah. So this is a trigger for animations that happen with these objects. But as you notice, like the track goes right over top because this is centered for this track down here. So like something I'd want to do is just like readjust the volume so that it does that. So it's like as they intended and stuff like that. Again, like their tool set appears to have been Maya. So like how that gets done was probably dynamically, like, you know, it was looking at where the track was and sort of centering it there, but it was using the wrong part of the track. So it placed it incorrectly or something. Like if it was a tool, it generated it wrong. Anyway, so it's small things like that I want to do. Yeah, so like for instance, something I've already done is I put there's a volume for Sand Ocean that gives it like the sandstorm effect, which is only used at like coming out of the pyramid and Sand Ocean Surface Slide. You turn right and there's like sandstorms, and when you're close to that, there's like a sandstorm effect. But I've taken that and I've applied it to the whole stage, and it works. And there's just a sandstorm the whole time, which is pretty cool. So that's going to be fun. Stuff like that. Yeah. I mean, so if you made the volumes correct and you made it so that they were everywhere except in the pyramid, then it would look correct. Yeah. But anyway, stuff like that. So things to come, right? Like there's like one of the big things that I'm probably going to be doing over the next week. Again, I don't know how much steam I'll have to continue for how long and whatever, but one of the big things is just going to be refactoring my code. There's so much garbage in here that could be made so much better and like moved out of the way and cleaned up. That I know I'm going to be doing a bunch of that. But then also just documentation of like recording what's what. I tried to do that as much as possible in my own code so that, like, you know, if Chemical or somebody else goes to look, it's at least there. But I want to make some proper documentation so that it will help with geez, can't think anymore. You know, so if people want to help out, right, like they can kind of look at stuff and start messing around. Yeah. Thanks. Again, it's usually just me rambling. But yeah, I'll probably call it quits here. It's been about 2 hours. At some point, I would think today, I'm probably going to go and post a zip of the stages that I was playing today that I did. Again, just for people to, just so you can see for yourselves that I'm not BSing and that um, you know, it's in there and you can play it and it works. So it's pretty cool. But yeah. All right. So I guess thanks to everyone for sticking around and listening to me. If you have questions later on, right, you can go to the F-Zero Nexus Discord, go to F-Zero Mods and ask stuff. I mean, thanks, Panzer, for a bunch of stuff. If you hadn't made that original Unity like viewing tool 8 years ago, I don't think I'd be here. So glad you did that and shared it. So, but yeah. So again, thanks for everything. I'll be around and I'll be posting updates as things go along. And don't worry, I don't blame you. But yes, it's your fault, I guess. Yeah. But thanks, everyone. Take care.